How's it going, everyone? Oh, a lot of people didn't really, well, to be honest, a lot of people didn't really expect me to do a live stream, a community hangout right now. So today we're going to be doing a community hangout. We're going to be reviewing Giant Size Phantom number 21. And Giant Size Phantom number 21. It's an annual 212 pages of absolutely awesomeness. I hope you enjoy the community hangout. Hope you've been having a great day wherever you are around the world. And for today, we've got some lofty hip hop mix music going on in the background. So enjoy and let's review some comic books. Rightio, as I said, we're going to be reviewing Giant Size Phantom number 21. Number 21, it's the annual. I think they've done, what, four free? Few publications done like four free annuals in the last couple of years. Amazing pieces of books they do. Well, you could say that they do amazing books. Like soon this week, they're going to be having, I think, the latest replica. No, not the latest replica, but the latest sequel, latest new story that come out this year. I think it's the fifth part to the Ibis Mystery story saga. So it's going to be pretty cool to read that. I still haven't gotten around to reading the 2023 Phantom Annual. I'll be reading that soon. I've been reading Giant Size Phantom comics, been catching up on that, and that's why we're going to be reviewing Giant Size Phantom number 21, an annual that has 212 pages of absolutely awesomeness, and let's get into it. As always, Glenn Lubston cover, beautiful looking back and front covers done by Glenn Lubston. Let's get into it. So the first round of stories is a reprint of the Phantom, the Imaginary Playmate. So this Phantom story, we've got this Phantom story. It's in color. It's a color version of the original story. It originally appeared in our issue number 1108, which is Few Publications issue of 1108 back in 1995. This color version has come from Norway's Ivan Peterson, who recently was interviewed by Chronicle Chamber, and this story is one of those, you would say, a light-hearted Phantom classic. I would say it's been coloured by well, you would say legendary now, but the amazing Ivan Peterson. I know if you have ever watched Ivan Peterson on the latest Chronicle Chamber podcast, there was a few things. I haven't watched the full couple of hours of the podcast. I haven't watched all of it, but from people that have watched it, they have said that there is some very, I would say, you would say controversial things that he said, but we're not going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the story, which is the imaginary playmate. It's a very, you would say, light-hearted Phantom classic, I would say, and it starts off with the with a, you would say, a rich, wealthier type person, wealthier type kid, and his parents, you'd say, are wealthy as well, and they live on this big estate, and this small kid doesn't really have no one to play with, and he's pretty, you would say, bored. But I think in days, you wouldn't call it bored. You would say, "Oh, I've got nothing to do. There's no one to play with." So he starts to go on little adventures, and he meets up with the Phantom. Now, the Phantom, he sort of becomes this imaginary playmate, and the kid's parents say, "Oh, wait, what did you do today, young person?" Oh, and this the parents think that, oh, this kid has invented a playmate. He loves what he does now, and but actually, when the one of the parents wants to try and figure out, oh, well, who is this playmate? Why is this kid, our son, keep talking about him? And the father tries and sees who this playmate is, when actually the playmate is the Phantom. These hoodlums, you would say, or these gangster type people and you'd try and try and take this estate and plantation off. The parents, the father and the mother, don't want any of that. The Phantom eventually helps. Well, they try and the Phantom basically helps make sure that evil people are not these evil people are, well, you would say evil people, but these these dodgy people are not going to kidnap a person over just wanting money, as in ransom. So the Phantom saves the little kid from getting kidnapped. He returns the little kid to his parents, and boy, does that little kid have a story to tell. I think one of the best things that could come out of this story. I think one of the best things that could come out of this reprint of the story is because you've got, obviously they published this story in color, but I think a good option for this story may be you could think of a sequel to this story where the kid, who is, you would say, the main character in this story, you could have him as a older type of him. So if this story was what it was published, made in the 1950s, 40s, has Wilson McCoy art, yeah, Wilson McCoy art, you could potentially nowadays have a story where this kid, who is, you would say, the center focus element and character in this story, you could have it where the kid is, again, in probably, he could have it where he's in his 20s or 30s. He's an older type person. He still remembers this this his imaginary playmate, and somehow along the line you could have it where the guy who is a 20 or 30-year old in another story, and you could have it where the Phantom somehow meets him, or he could be an older, very older, wise person, and telling his grandchildren how he used to hang out with this imaginary playmate, and then those kids. I think it's a bit like how the Jane Carey storyline goes on. That could be the same storyline that this could take, but could have a little bit of different variety in a bit more ways. So we then have the adventures of Catman. This I love Catman, and I love all these old stories and the old 1950s stories. I love how a few publications keeps printing these stories. I don't think there is many of these stories to go. They've already, I think, at some point they've already ran a couple of years ago. I think they've already ran out of Raven stories, like Raven stories. But I love the simplicity of these characters. Yeah, they got their they have their things where they might have a variation of the Phantom or a variation of Batman when he was in the 1950s. Because I think before I've heard this somewhere where you have the obviously you've got Batman. He's a big huge character right now, but I think it was before the 80s, 70s, 60s, somewhere in there. But before then, when Batman was, I keep hearing this, and you see, when I think Batman was, I think it was before the 60s, he was like a person that was sort of like a good doer, but he was also a person that didn't have that nasty, moody, dark Batman until I think the 70s, 80s, I think. Because in the 70s, they had that storyline that a lot of people regard as a good story. Many would say that it's one of those stories where it just got made. It got made because it's one of those stories where the evil person, aka the Joker, is the main frame of the character, and somehow it got made. It got made. What do you call that name? It got made canon, pretty much. Every story after that story followed on from that story as an end point. But we've got Catman. He has, well, in this story, he has a girlfriend who is checking out this professor who is under the guard of the national security. He's like a person that needs to be protected from the people who want his inventions. When we find out that the lady who I think is Terry, maybe Terry, who is going out with Catman, no one actually really knows this. If you're a villain in this story, no one really knows this, and that she finds out that the real professor, the real scientist, is basically tied up. She then is put in danger. The Catman has to then work out where she is. Good old Fiverr ads. So he works out that, and then and tries and stop this evil person from taking this from taking this thing that could potentially have very, very bad consequences for the world. And the Catman, the professor is going to, this evil professor is going to try and sell this to another nation, and the Catman doesn't want any of that. This beachside house is going to go up in flames. Catman saves that from happening. The iron robot does most of the work, and then Catman just destroys it. That's pretty much the end of the story. And then we also have an ad for the Phantom board game, The Treasures of Draken. I've got 2 copies of this board game. I still haven't played it. Don't have the time. Nowadays I don't have the time to sit down and play the board game. It gets that way. So we have the Phantom board game, The Treasures of Dracon. You can get it for $135, including postage. Available from a few publications. or phantomcomic.com.au. And Catman saves his girlfriend and the army who was wanting to get this device then decides we must not risk an international intercept, and Catman and Kit have already gone. I didn't get a chance to thank them. They'll like that they don't ask for thanks. They're like that. They don't ask for thanks. And then we have the Crimson Comment. There's two stories in this storyline. The Crimson Comment, which we haven't really seen much of him in this series. One of the reasons why we haven't seen much of him because it's old comics. There's a point in time where some of those comics that you may have been reading in your 20s, your 30s, or when you're younger may not. It's a harder thing to find these days than old comics. Like the more rarer type ones are very hard to find. That's why sometimes before in the earlier ones where I've reviewed Phantom Comics and I've reviewed GiantSize Phantom Comics, they sometimes have a little ad down here like we're looking for these, we're looking for one specific comic, or we're looking for 4 or 5 different comics. And yeah, I usually read those out. Like it's pretty cool. And the Crimson Comment is, I like this character. He's just he he's a part of, you would say, the army, and a lot of people don't know. A lot of people in this comic strip don't really, or this storyline don't really know who this Crimson Comment. How's it going? How's it going, Howling Madness? Would like. So the Crimson Comment, he is basically, he's heard of one of his main nemesis or enemies is Cobra, which he has basically kidnapped 2 scientists in this storyline, and then he's tried and made them try and build something, and he builds a rocket for them, these 2 scientists. And then at the end of this story, midway through this story, the Crimson Comment helps those 2 scientists escape. The Crimson Comet then basically tears this island down. He makes sure this doesn't happen. He makes sure that what the Cobra's preens are wanting him, what the Cobra wanting to do, doesn't happen. But then the Cobra escapes and he's in the rocket and he blasts away. And then we have another Crimson Comment story. This time, the Crimson Comment is helping US Navy, US Army type people in trying to save them, because there's this group of US Navy Army type officers, and they're basically in a bit of strife, and they're literally nearly going to get captured. And so the Crimson Comment saves them. It's a very short story, and it leaves us with a little bit of a cliffhanger at the end. But it's a good story, I would say. Crimson Comment saves the people in the ice, in the snow, and at the end, they get onto a plane, and the Crimson Comment transforms himself back into Ralph Rivers. The name is Ralph Rivers. I was put off by that Doug to help you, but the Crimson Comet got in first. Thanks anyway. Now let's pile aboard this plane and get home. Yeah, I like those type of stories. And there's another type of a similar type of story coming up, which is got stuff to do with Phantom Commando. It's got three short stories in that storyline and in this book. And now we're going to get into the Panther. Number 13, featuring Gun for Hire. Another great story, another great character. A lot of people with this character, a lot of people don't know about this character because I think, yeah, it was because it was created by Paul Willihan. A lot of Australian Phantom fans know about this character because you might be collecting the GiantSize Phantom series like I am, and you know about this character, but a lot of people who aren't collecting this series wouldn't actually know about this character because I would say it's not that popular with international type people because a lot of people just like the popular type characters, which are like the Marvel and DC stuff. But when you have a chance to read Australian Phantom story, no, not Australian Phantom stories, but like Australian created comic book characters like the Panther, Catman, and Sir Falcon, the earlier type stories. I'm not that keen on the Kick Hefler stories. I think they're rushed, but there's one in here anyway, and we're going to talk about it. But there's other stories where there is the Shadow, I love him, and the Phantom Ranger. Phantom Ranger and I think Shadow got picked up. They were very popular in Brazil, and there was a few stories from Brazil that got published in the Phantom World series. Unfortunately, ended a couple of years ago. But we're in the Panther. So in this story, we start off with the Panther basically dismantling another group of people, and his group of people is basically gangsters, and they run with smuggling operations, and the Panther doesn't really want any of that. The Panther wants to. He's similar to the Phantom in a way. He wants to get rid of smuggling, and then a young person comes along. He's tracked down heaps of good doers and killed most of them, frankly. And he has is given a job to try and kill the Panther. And in the coming pages, he doesn't bring that to intuition. And the way that it happens, that there's this young kid who is pivotal in this story. If this young kid wasn't in this story, the Panther would be dead. So the young tribesman, the young kid, the young warrior to be, helps the Panther in. Firstly, helps the Panther from not going to be killed, and helps this guy turn a new leaf, pretty much. And then at the end, because of the young kid's brave, heroic actions, the Panther survives. This guy who I think maybe in his 20s, mid 20s, he gets a lighter sentence, pretty much. He goes to jail, but he also brings information to the Panther, and then because he's bringing that information to the Panther, he gets a lighter sentence. And then the Panther gives a little bit of speech about the young kid's heroic actions, and he's then, I think, no longer a boy, he's now a warrior. And I would have all the jungle know that to this small one, the Panther owes his life to. And then that's the end. Another great story. And now we have the Phantom Ranger, one of my absolute favorite characters. Reason why? This art. Amazing. Amazing. Number 53. Yeah, this Phantom Ranger was when this series, the original series that was getting published by a few publications back in the 1950s, there was, I think, was it this one or was it the other one? No, it was this one. Because there was this series, it was getting published by a few publications. This is original few publications character. After this series ended, after the original series for the Phantom Ranger ended, he went on to, I think, become very, very popular. As the same as, I think, the Shadow. He became very, very popular in Brazil. And yeah, there's a few of the stories from Brazil that has been published in Australian language, in well English language, you'd say, by a few publications. I think that was it was a little while ago, and I think it might have had something to do with GiantSize, or it had something to do with a Phantom annual. I think I remember fondly that there was a. I'm pretty sure that there was a Phantom Ranger story in the 2018 Phantom annual because it had stuff to do with westerns and cowboys. So in this story, these two outlaws or potential outlaws are being attacked by outlaw. The carriage is being attacked by outlaws basically, and then the Phantom Ranger wraps them up, and then finds out that those outlaws that were attacking that carriage was a woman. She was a lady. The person was a lady, and then the lady brings the Phantom Ranger back to her father's place, and the father tells the story of how this very, very bad person. I'll read it. So I'll tell you, son. I remember the very first day Pancho and I discovered that claim. So it's basically talking about gold. Pancho left to register the claim. A short time later, Renfro and his gang arrived and beat me up. There, my daughter found me dumped in the bushes with a pack horse. She was able to bring me here. So basically, there's a bit of, you'd say, gold fever happening here, and so the outlaw thinks that, oh, there's a bit of a gold here, there's a bit of gold here, a bit of money to made here, and he basically beats the beats the beats the stuffing out of old mate, and then the Phantom Ranger hears this story. Later on, he creates a plan to get rid of this Renfur guy. That plan is to distract Renfur and his gang while the Phantom Ranger blows the whole, basically seals the gang in the cave. Only lightly, but only lightly. And then the lady thinks, oh, but you've killed them. No, I haven't. I've only done a light piece of dynamite. That was only a light charge, just enough to seal them in. So when the sheriff comes to find out what's happening, the Phantom Ranger's already done more than 90% of the work and wrap them up in a very neat parcel. Very neat pastel. Now we've got the Sir Falcon, number 4, number 41. This story, I just gotta say, this story is very, very strange. So this story involves a professor wanting to take over the world. It involves Sir Falcon and his lady friend discovering this island that has all this, you would say, dinosaurs, and then we have these big lizards and all these big creatures, and this professor is wanting to take over the world with these creatures, and then at the end, Sir Falcon he basically says, you can't do this, mate. You can't be turning small animals into bigger animals, and you can't be doing all this. You can't be taking over the world with these big creatures. And then, because we also have warriors and a tribe in this story, and the warriors do not like what well, for starters, the warriors are scared. So then the Sir Falcon, he gets the professor to bring all the creatures back to normal, and then the end of it is, anyhow, I never knew where their next meal was going to come from. I definitely knew where their next meal was going to come from. It's going to come straight from. It's going to come straight from the professor. And then the Sir Falcon says, better to start a poultry farm, Professor. With your knowledge, think of the enormous hens and the gigantic eggs you could raise. Now, the reason how these creatures were able to get so big is because he used a special ray treatment to make them big. Now we have a brand new Planet Man story. Another retro future adventure of Planet Man. And it's about, I'm going to say that it's about relationships and stuff. So a futuristic Planet Man goes onto this asteroid, lands onto this asteroid. He's having sort of like, you'd say, sort of like dreams that aren't real, and he meets a couple of Planet Mans. One that we've already seen, Planet Man in GiantSize Phantom number 12, 13, 15. That's this guy here. And then we see the Gam Berry version. He first appeared in GiantSize Phantom number 5. I have both of those appearances, and they're in a playlist somewhere. And then Phantom Ranger meets a futuristic version of Sir Falcon, which is amazing. And then he meets the Ghost Who Walks, which he's just normal. Is he though? Then he goes into the cave, finds this very odd, strange, weird person, and this person wants to clone wants to clone a female, and well, that's never going to happen. So Planet Man then takes the lady back to the ship, and he also takes the weird little person back to the ship as well. And then we also have this. You think you will understand a woman by logic and science. You're right about one thing. You really didn't get it, do you? Talk about impossible. And that's the funny part in that story. The funny part is that a person thinks they can try and I'm not going to talk about that, but and then they get onto the ship and they all have a conversation about relationships and girls. Then we have the Phantom Commando, bail out or die. So we have 3 stories. The first one is the Phantom Commando. He's on a bit of an air trip, and he gets shot down by Japanese soldiers. Then he then steals a plane and goes and tries and he bombs that ship up. So then we have the Phantom, the U-boat trouble. Again, the Phantom Commando. He's with his old mate, his friend, and little Tiny, and he is on an island. This island isn't a real island, and he finds a group of German soldiers. He gets captured by the German soldiers. Then he escapes from the help of I think, Aboriginal Australian type person. I think a native type person. He punches the living daylights out of a fellow soldier, enemy soldier. Then he gets onto a submarine slash U-boat, and at the end of that story, the U-boat surrenders, and it seems to be fella on the conning tower wearing a mask. There's a fella wearing a conning tower on the conning tower wearing a mask, and then they know him as the Phantom Commando. The last story in the Phantom Commando is that the Phantom Commando has been washed and been shot down, and then he makes an uneventful, yet a very he gets captured by Japanese soldiers. He gets put in a prison. He gets put into a cell. He meets a fellow Australian who is very, 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 very ill. The fellow Australian tells the Phantom Commando about the bombs that were under the sea, and then the Phantom Commando makes a plan. He tells the Japanese soldiers that this is where to go, this is where you should anchor, and then in the final bit, it's a bit like dun 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 dun, that ship just got blown sky high, and then we got the Shadow. The Shadow is basically what happens in this Shadow story is the Shadow goes and is called upon to this gang. This gang is wanting the Shadow to find the gang leader's daughter. He then goes and finds the daughter, brings the daughter back to the place where he's been asked to bring her, and then because the Shadow's already done half the work for the gangsters, the gangsters bring the daughter to another location. The Shadow escapes from the location he was already in and saves the girl, and that is the end of the story. Saves the girl, and then they go on a Maryland trip to find the girl's father. Then we have the Phantom Messenger bag has finally arrived. You can now get it for $60 plus shipping. Visit the Phantom shop, www.phantomcomics.com.au. And their last story, it is a new story done by Jason Paulos and Andrew Consonant. It is the one and only The Raven. So there's this. So we're going down a trip down memory lane. We're having The Raven. The one thing I don't particularly like about this Raven story is because you've got the Raven here. He's a bit further up here. You've got the Raven. He's right here, and there's a good image from Jason Paulos where The Raven is in a striking pose. Where is it? Is that one? No, it's that one. There it is. So the Raven is in a striking pose. The way I remember the Raven when they'll publishing a few publications was publishing the original stories of the Raven. The way I remember him, he wasn't he there was a bit of action, but the most part of the Raven was the mystery and the mystique and the fantasy part of the Raven. That's what I liked about the supernatural part of the Raven. But in this story and in the new stories, actually, they've got him boosted up, and he's very athletic and strong. I remember the Raven being not as he was slim, but had the mystery part of the Raven was a bit better. And then we have this big wolf, this big werewolf, and he scares the living crap out of the person. And the Raven gets him, and then we have, and the person tells, your brother is free. No! It seems that the war between the Raven and his brother, Captain Crow, may not be over yet. Yeah, that's what I was trying to say with the Raven. His Raven, Jason Paulo's Raven seems to go on the more of the muscular type motion of the Raven, and that's the cover of GiantSize Phantom, and we must be seeing more stories to do with the Raven because it says to be continued soon. So that was my review of GiantSize Phantom number 21. I hope if you've just joined us, if you've just joined us with in the replay, or if you're watching live right now, I hope you have had an amazing day. I've gotten a lot of things done today, and this has been a great way to end my day and to even review a GiantSize Phantom comic and annual. I hope you have a great day. And on Tuesday, hopefully on Tuesday or this end of this week, we'll be having a new episode of The Enthusiast, number 5 of season number 3. It's going to be a longer type episode, and it's going to be great. I know it will be great. And as always, keep Phantom Caving, stay safe, and I'll be doing another community hangout very soon, because I have a few more GiantSize Phantom comics to have a look at and review, and then I will also be reading the 2023 Phantom Manual. So until then, thank you, and as always, subscribe to the Phantom Cave Reviews YouTube channel, and as always, keep Phantom Caving.